I'm delighted to welcome Serena Bacuzzi.
Thank you. Hello everyone, really nice to be here. I'm just going to give an overview about the Midlands Net Zero Hub, just to make you aware about the support that is available to local authorities mainly, but also to carry on the discussion we were having about collaboration. So we are hoping to, through our role, to improve collaboration and communication between local and national government. So as I said, I'm from the Midlands Net Zero Hub, and I'm one of the regional principal Net Zero projects officer. Really big word, but so just to give you an idea, the Midlands Net Zero Hub has been set up by what used to be called BASE, but is now the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero. So we are funded by government, and we've been set up around 2018. We are one of the 5 energy or net zero hub across the UK, and we are covering the stretching out for the whole Midlands, so from Shropshire area to Lincoln. And we offer, our main role is actually to support local decarbonisation and green growth, and provide capacity and capability to local enterprise partnership, local authorities, and also community groups and on a local area, just to ensure actually that we've got more net zero and energy projects on the ground. And that can be done through different ways that I'll go through in the next slides. So we are, our accountable body is Nottingham City Council. The reason being is because, as most of these sort of support-based organisations are always delivered through a bidding scheme, and Nottingham City Council managed to win the bid around delivering the support for the Midlands Zero Hub. And how we are set up is through the identification, kind of the appointment of one net zero project officer for each of the local enterprise partnership area. I'm the officer that covers the Greater Birmingham, Solihull left area, but I'm also supporting local authorities across the Stoke and Staffordshire area. Every net zero hub is set up in a slightly different way, but overall our objective is to deliver on the net zero strategy, the government net zero strategy. So pretty much supporting carbon reduction and local green growth, as I said, increasing the number, quality and scale of energy projects and net zero projects on the ground, and enable local areas to attract investment, whether it's kind of from a public and government funding to private investment as well. But we also try to raise awareness of opportunity and benefits of local energy investment, so linking up to what Zoe was saying earlier, just the importance of trying to build up an energy system and energy projects that are providing benefits to the local community is what we're looking for. Promote best practice across the region and improve local, regional and national communication channels. So one of the issues that we have identified talking to local authorities is that there is really lack of understanding and communication between the local, regional and national government as well. So it's how we can bring all this together and make sure that actually we accelerate the transition to net zero by improving collaboration, partnership and communication, as you were saying earlier. So we position ourselves pretty much at the center of that sort of map of local, regional and national government, or not just government, different organizations at local, national and regional level. So we are an organization that is independent from anything, so we haven't got any sort of political or commercial interest. We provide independent advice, and mainly we work with the local authorities to try, obviously, to deliver net zero projects at local level. So we are very much interested into, obviously, understanding the local needs. So we talk a lot with local authorities and officers as well to try and understand what are the barriers and challenges at the local level, and then building up that sort of trust and understanding then with feedback that learning to government as well, saying, okay, this is the gaps, that's where the localities, like the local areas, needs support with, whether it is through grant scheme or through other capacity or capability support that is required. So in the next slide, I'll go through some of the programs and projects that the Midlands Zero Hub has been involved in. So our role is quite a mixed approach. So we are funded by the government, so we are here to provide a sort of capacity and capability to the local authorities mainly, but also we administer different sort of government funding scheme as well. So example of work that we've done is through the commissioning of some studies to identify opportunities for net zero projects. For example, we've been involved in the definition of in a study that's been done by the Royal Agricultural Society of England, and we've developed a low carbon horticultural study and a farm of the future study to help understand a little bit what our opportunities around for net zero on a sort of rural areas or from a farm-based context. But also we've provided some guides as well to local authorities to help them understand what are the steps to try to electrify their fleet and what do they need to do, for example, to make the existing depot electric fleet ready. And then other kind of support that we offer is through funding and commissioning of some of the carbon calculator tools like Scatter and the parish carbon calculator, pretty much to help local authorities quantify their current emissions and project their sort of long-term pathway to net zero. So it's important obviously to understand what projects can be progressed if you know where you are on the map of your journey to net zero. So that's what we are trying to do as well. And obviously try to support with through collaboration. So for example, we've been providing some funding to the West Midlands Combined Authority to enable them to kind of collaborate with local partners and local stakeholders. I think we will agree, as discussed earlier, that is that sort of sharing and knowledge sharing and communication with all the different sort of stakeholders, whether it's public and private sectors. That's where the kind of net zero project and the innovation comes about, and that's what we want to see more. And what government wants to see as well. Sometimes that is not being reflected by the type of funding maybe that they're releasing, but that's what they want to see. So as I said, we also administer some of the government funding. Particularly the funding at the moment are very much targeted to housing retrofitting. So some of you might be familiar with some of these schemes, like the local authority delivery scheme, sustainable warmth competition, and the home upgrade grant. All of these schemes at the moment are over, unfortunately, but obviously is retrofitting, home retrofitting is very much high up on the agenda for government yet. So we're hoping to see more funding streams coming on in that direction. And the majority of the funding are targeted to lower income householders and buildings that are EPC rated quite low, like between E and G. We've also supported community groups or community energy groups where with the sort of feasibility, some funding to help them identify feasibility study, for example, for the installation of a solar farm or any other kind of net zero projects. This fund, the Rural Community Energy Fund, unfortunately that's another one that's been closed. Very popular, and we are hoping again, we are pushing as a net zero hub to receive more funding from government to hopefully see more of these community energy fund being made available, potentially not just in rural areas but also urban areas. But at the moment there is no further announcement being released yet. But yeah, I'm quite positive because of the success that we had in the previous round. So the kind of the most recent funding that are available at the moment, mainly for public sector bodies, is the public sector the public sector decarbonization scheme, which is not directly administered by the Midlands Zero Hub, so Salix is kind of delivering this grant. But what we can offer to public sector body is to prepare them to be ready for the bid. As you guess most of you know, like government funding are coming last minute. You've got like very short windows where you need to apply for funding, and then that's it, it disappeared. So what we identify, talking to local authorities as well, is to help to be prepared to bid for this kind of grants that are coming. So what we are doing is to support them with assessment of their building, identify the opportunities and projects to deliver through future funding schemes, whether it is this public sector decarbonization scheme or another one. Is just being ready, being ready for when the grant is coming, and that's essential at the moment. We shouldn't be in that position, but we are. So we are trying to kind of fill the gaps where are needed. And the new one as well, which is not being kind of fully launched yet, but is the local energy advice demonstrator. Again, this one is called demonstrator for a reason, because the whole idea is trying to test an energy advice service to try to reach to mainly to kind of how to reach sort of communities, and also to target it to those buildings that are very disconnected, so kind of off-grid or very poorly insulated or with a low energy efficiency. So it's very much targeted on that sort of one-to-one service, advice service, and that will cover all sorts of elements of advice in terms of improving the energy efficiency of a building. Not the kind of energy usage in terms of how you're using energy or how you supply energy, but more the building itself. So hopefully there will be more communication and details be made available and more public in the not distant future. The beauty of this kind of program is not targeted specifically to local authorities, but it's kind of a collaborative approach. So we welcome support from different organizations that are already working in the energy advice space, as well as the local authorities, obviously. And finally, other program that been involved is other national skills. An example is the skill training programs. We've been kind of administering the delivery of a couple of skill training programs. One was called the Green Home Grant Skill Training Program, and one the Home Decarbonization Skills Training. Obviously, it's been realized that it's really good that we talk a lot about home retrofitting. That's what we need to do. But sometimes then we didn't understand actually there are some challenges about availability of suppliers that can do that, can deliver that. And the main reason is because there is a need for upskilling existing workforce or the suppliers to be able to offer that sort of services. So we've been kind of partnering with some training providers in England to upskill that sort of supply chain through these government schemes. And the second one is the miscompliance enforcement competition. So local authorities are need to inform, are kind of required to deliver the requirements of the minimum energy efficiency standard regulation. And so we've been kind of supporting, providing identification of capacity and capability to deliver and to kind of ensure that the local authority are complying with this. And this is probably on the side, it's not very technical, but it's something that is really needed, because sometimes we know the technicalities of the work that needs to be done on a building, but then we are missing all these kind of niche sort of requirements, and so we are trying to kind of step in and help out where possible through the funneling of funding from government. And obviously, because of our position, the more we kind of talk to local authorities or communities, the better we understand what are the local needs, and then we can refer that back to government to say, okay, your proposed program doesn't work because this is actually what the local communities need. So we help them kind of review their sort of grant funding schemes in relation to our local knowledge or the information that we gather from the local communities and the local authorities. So yeah, it's very kind of high level and strategic here, but there is quite a lot of connection with the work that your local authorities here in Staffordshire are doing, and also, as I said just now, yeah, we are very keen to listen to any sort of challenges and needs at the local level. So again, thank you very much for inviting me, and if you've got any questions, I think it's either later or now.
Yeah, well actually we'll probably take, if there are any questions directly, we take them now. We're running a bit against time, but if there are any questions now, no, we'll move on till later then.
Sorry, I just wondered exactly
right,
where
sorry.
the boundaries are.
It
Yes.
is a bit confusing, isn't it? You're right, Anne.
Yeah, there is, to be honest, there is no boundary. So we are the Midlands. So as I said, we are stretching out from Staffordshire to Lincoln. We are covering the kind of, as a geography, the 9 local enterprise partnerships. So it is a little bit difficult to understand. But we have 5 hubs, so we are working pretty much together. So whether we go, if we're going on other boundaries, so on the other geography, we always refer it back to the other net zero hub. So what is important is that you can use us as a kind of a vehicle or kind of communication channel, and then we can obviously identify what sort of net zero hub is the most appropriate for your need. Okay.
So with the secretariat provided by Nottingham City government, yet you're coming from Birmingham, that's either joined up or, yeah.
So everybody, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Serena, thank you very much. We'll just move on to...
Am I next?
yes, we'll move on to Gillian. Gillian next. If I can find your presentation, Gillian. Some of you will know Gillian. That's yours, right? And that's yours. It's on mine. Great. This is joined up. You may not seem joined up.
So I'll just start for you.
Yeah, you start, Gillian. You're used to starting without me.
I think it's just, yeah, what to do. We started with looking at a house as an individual piece of equipment that we use every day, and how very complicated and confusing it is to try and bring that, up to a level that we want to get to. Serena's just talked about how complicated it is from the policy down, so I kind of feel that I'm trying to pull those bits together. Oh, I work for local authority, by the way, so I'm delighted. And to confuse matters even more, you may have picked up that I was introduced to Staffordshire, Moorlands and High Peak today because I work for both councils, which are in different counties, different regions, and they have different systems of working with all these funding pots. So as you can imagine, my brain is sometimes a bit frazzled. So anyway, what I thought I would do today, I'm not going to do anything technical, I just wanted to explain to you the sorts of funding that's around just now. And, what did I do with this? Oh, right. I'm asking you!
You're in the council, I'm in the
He's an engineering, isn't it? What was this thing there? Anyway, so, yeah, so what I thought I'd do today is just talk about the funding that I'm trying to administer or steer or push, and then also trying to pick out of that how we can sort of upskill our local trades to help us feed into deliver that. So very boring, so talk on what she says. Mark, how did you get that on full screen?
Just about to do that.
Are you the technical assistant?
Yeah. Vince knows it. Vince knows PowerPoint. I don't.
Hey, there we go.
Still he hopes.
So this is me. Am I press now?
It's alright, no, you're not there yet.
Oh.
You should be there.
Yeah.
Yes.
Can I do that? Yay!
Good.
Whoa. Thanks, Vince.
So, I know some of you are number geeks, so I thought I'd just give you a few numbers of what we have in the Moorlands.
I'll get out of your way.
So yeah, you can see there we've got about 45,000 dwellings. Those could be houses, flats, communal buildings, terraced, all of the different types of housing, the dwellings. Social housing is about 4,000. They're mostly with your housing, so council doesn't technically have any control over what they do. I know Joe Porter mentioned this morning about working with them, and we are working with them on their retrofit programme. 200 kilotons, sorry, Sunday brain doesn't work, a year from housing of CO2. I'll show you in a minute what that means. These statistics here are sort of prorated across the counties from a tool called Systemic. So it's sort of, not every house has had an energy performance certificate. So it's sort of taking what we've got and sort of applying some assumptions. But the more an energy performance certificates we can get, and the better picture we have of what we can then do. So it shows you here, D to G is pretty bad. This is 14,000, I think. Potential for C above is 13,000, so there's about 1,500 there that we're not going to get to C. So what do we do with those? Question, we'll park that for now. By moving from an E to C, roughly half the CO2 emissions, which is good for our end targets. It doesn't get you to zero, as we mentioned earlier. We're hoping the grid does that, somebody said earlier, laugh. And if you assume, I know this is very, I know people will tut at this, but I just put a number in, 15,000 per house, I don't know, who knows, it's all very different. We're talking 215-ish million. So, and we'll still need power at the end of it as well. So, this is kind of what we're looking at. So we'll get it done in a couple of weeks, no problem. So this, Serena will recognise. So one of the tools that Serena was just talking about is scatter. And this is scatter. It's an online tool where you can play about with different parameters of your carbon emissions. So this is Staffordshire Moorlands. The big chunk that you can see there is industry. And the reason why our industry is so big is because of cheese factory. It's just the cheese. It's the cement. Yeah, because we've got cement production in the area, it totally skews our figures compared to anybody else. So that's why we don't like to publish them next to anybody else in Staffordshire. So this is it. So as you can see, residential buildings here is the highest if you took out industry. So we need to look at it. Being a climate change officer, it covers everything. So I'm kind of battling internally, not with myself, but the council, to try and push in that focus on housing. So I think it's something we really need to really, really dig deep and try and get as far as we can on. So the type of things to think about, I'm sure you've picked up most of this today already, is the type of dwelling. The building type, is it stone? Is it cavity wall insulation? Does it have period features? Is it in a conservation area? We've got the Peak Park. Who owns it? Do you live in your own house? Is it a landlord you've never met? Is it partly owned by you? Do you share it with your brother, which would be a pain? And then there's funding. As Serena touched on, and I'll touch on in a minute as well. There are funding pots. They're complicated. They change daily. Not quite, but almost. And then we have this term which somebody mentioned earlier, able to pay. I don't like that because I think it's willing to pay or self-funded, because you might not have the money, but you might be wanting to do something. So we need to have those products from the Building Society, for example, to help people do that. So those green loans, mortgages, whatever they might be. And then I think somebody mentioned, Graham, I think he's not here now, mentioned earlier the disruption hassle. That is actually one of the biggest problems we have for people, because they've got to live in the house while the work's been done. They don't want it. You know, I don't want to clear my loft to have installations, and that's where my Christmas decorations go. It's all part of the package. So, for privately owned or privately rented, there is funding available depending on certain parameters. What I'm trying to do is target those eligible people through mail shots, press releases, all that kind of stuff. But as I say, with the self-funders, which are the people that don't fit into those brackets, we've got to think, oh, there's typing error there, I apologise. I did my homework on the bus, sorry. So we've got to look at the skill chain. really there. I've done my own, so you'll be impressed, completely non-academic research. And I've asked lots of my friends who are tradespeople, you know, why are you not doing this? Don't need to, I'm busy, I'm booked up for 12 months, I don't care. Really? Okay. So that's a problem. Supply chain, obviously, of the equipment, the technical bits and bobs you need. The advice we've talked about a lot as well today is like you just don't know where to go, who to trust, and then obviously the trades of all of that, and then that quality assurance piece. So we talked this morning about what people are taught this past 2035, which I know doesn't mean much to any of you, but it's basically a standard by which a retrofit assessment and installation that sort of has to happen. Now that's really complicated, and you have to be trained to be able to do that. You have to want to be trained, and a lot of these local tradespeople have been stung by previous things before, where they've put a lot of effort into taking time off to get trained on things, and then the scheme's been pulled, waste of time. So there's all these things. That also makes it more expensive, having those quality assurance things, which are right, we do need the quality assurance, but it then pushes up the price for people. So it just adds more and more and more complexity, which is not helping people have the confidence to do this. So these are a couple of the funding streams. I know Serena mentioned the Sustainable Warmth Competition, that's government funding administered by the Net Zero Hub. All the local authorities have to bid in for it. Again, we have to be ready to go, and quite a lot of guesswork of how much we need. In Staffordshire, it's delivered by Staffordshire Warmer Homes, which is good. In some ways, it means I don't have to go through procurement or contract management or anything, but on the other hand, I don't necessarily have the control over where they put their efforts with that. We're delivering round 1 at the moment. Round 2 is coming. It's embargoed, can't tell you what's happening, but we know it's coming, but we don't know how much it's going to be or anything like that. But I will give you a few more details on that in a minute. The other funding that's around is called Eco4, and this is the one that's delivered by the larger utility companies. There's a list of improved installers. You as an individual can check which ones you can use, and you can apply yourself. It doesn't have to go through this other programme. Now all of these fall under this PASS 2035 standard, so they have to be done to that with that quality assurance, which makes them more expensive, which means you might not get as far as you want to do had you paid yourself. So, and also it doesn't do, I think Nick was saying earlier, it doesn't do that maintenance work. So if you have a piece of dampness in your wall, they're not going to touch it. You have to get that fixed first. They're not going to decorate after you've had your internal wall insulation. So there's all these things that just push it away for people a little bit. Eco Plus is interesting. This is a new one. We've not quite had the guidance on yet. I heard the other day, I don't know if you were in that meeting.
No.
This is news to you.
Yeah, it's not administered by the Net Zero Hub.
Of course. So the department formerly known as BASE said the other day that it should be live in June. And this changes, so before all these other schemes have been based on the income of the house, and only the houses that have an energy rating of D or below. So that's pretty good. For Eco4 Plus, we're going to be targeting council tax bands from A to D. However, it will be more simple. It will be that full retrofit that people were talking about this morning. It will be cavity wall or loft or heating controls. It won't be that whole house package. And there may be a household contribution, but we're waiting again for information. So as a local authority, I'll be able to send out letters to everybody that we know is A to D and say, you may be eligible, please apply. So that's how I'll be targeting. Social Housing Decarbonisation Scheme, it's complicated, isn't it? Is for social housing providers, and it's large scale retrofit, and I don't know when the next round is going to be, again, it's a competition. Okay. I feel exhausted already. Eco4 Flex, now this is where a local authority can get involved. This has what's called proxies that are not to do with the housing income, but it can be to do with certain benefits, or like GP, like a doctor referral. If somebody has a specific condition, then they can be referred through this route. And this involves quite a lot of administration. It's not insurmountable, but I haven't set it up yet, but it is coming. So this is another route in for people. Now, what's Margot, that you just mentioned a minute ago, is the whole upgrade grant too. And what that is, it's a retrofit grant for houses that are not heated with gas, so anything that's off the gas grid or heated by electricity. It must have an energy performance certificate of D or less for privately owned, or E if it's rented, privately rented. And basically, if you live, you won't be able to read this, I'll ask Mark to send it in afterwards. I was going to do a map, but I didn't know how to. If you live in any of those postcode areas, regardless of your household income, you'll be eligible for grant. So that changes the way that we target things quite a lot for this scheme. So we've not got it yet, it's coming, but we will be basically contacting all these parishes so that they know that that is coming. So, the pros and cons, I think, of having these big pots of funding. I didn't even check the time when I started talking, sorry. Give me a shout if we go.
I'll give you a shout.
The funding's really good, but it's a drop in the ocean, really, for what we need to achieve. I think somebody mentioned earlier, it inflates the prices of those works. So somebody used the example of a air source heat pump. You know, through one of these schemes, it'll be 14, 15k for yourself. It would be less, like, I can't remember what somebody said, 5, 6? As I said, my non-scientific, not academically proven research, tradespeople aren't really interested. I can find. I mean, if you can find anybody, please let me know. So we need to make green jobs attractive, and it's not just taking people from school, because we need those people that have skills already to upskill them. It's not going to be a new skill. I think Becky mentioned earlier people going through the retrofit academy and coming out and going, I can do stuff now. It's like, well, no, you can't, you don't know how a building's built. You know. So the self-funders, they need advice that they can trust, they need support, they might need project management help, you know, maybe like architects, you know, assistants could help with things like that. We need the financial products, so we need to work with building societies, the banks, Green Infrastructure Bank, you know, all these organisations that are beginning to appear, but we don't quite know what happens with them. We need that to help people make it easier. And this last one, and this is just a whinge, because I'm feeling like it today. This whole project from a local authority point of view very much comes from climate change, environmental, energy officers, but actually we really need to get the regeneration people involved, because it is about building those skills and working with schools and working with the county on their education piece, because it's actually, the county have nothing to do with housing, but they do have everything to do with upskilling us and building that economy. And that kind of says most of what I just said. So it's a drop in the ocean. If anybody thinks that they might be eligible for any of those grants that I mentioned, please contact Beat the Cold. I forgot to put their number on here, but I will do that before I send it. Because they're able to sort of check eligibility. Also, please tell people if you have somebody that you know, or just to tell people at bus stops that these things exist. So we're left with all the complicated stuff. I'd really like to explore community schemes. I think somebody mentioned the hayfield, solar panel, bulk buying, that sort of thing. I really want to look at that. I want to look at targeting street by street again working with regeneration. We need to stimulate the market to get it going. I don't think that the big funding streams are going to do that because it's a false picture of a market. We've got conservation issues that need addressing. And we just need to embed those skills right at the start. And then I just did this because I was thinking about what to say today and I quite liked it, so I thought I left it in. So this kind of is all the things we've got to consider to change how we think about energy and how we engage with it and what it means to us and how it affects our lives. And that's me.
Gillian, thank you very much. I'm sure there will be some questions, particularly about when funding will come. But what we'll do is we'll move.
So you're not going anywhere.
Yeah. What we'll do is we'll move to Chris in a second, and then we will meld the final panel, which I think Charlie is going to join, and Paul Hopewell. And if you can, you'll be around to take questions on that. Any questions? So in 1 second, we'll just.
I'm Scottish.
I'll introduce myself. So my name is Chris Langdon. I'm probably one of the bad guys in the room in the sense that I've been in the development and regeneration sector for about 25 years, also construction and property. I've worked public sector and private sector and community sector now as well, and I was up until about a year ago with a business called Decumans, also known as Energy, and I was involved in things with Keel, such as the low carbon energy generation project. Thinking about things that people have said today already, I think Gillian just said something about working in energy with people from the regeneration sector. I think that is really critical, and because I come from the regeneration sector, for the last 5 years I've been learning a lot about energy, and the difference in language and some of the overlaps is a real opportunity, I think, to work better together. The other thing that I've learned was I'm going to go around all my friends' houses turning thermostats up to 3 or down to 3. That's been a very useful thing. I think it was something Nick said at the beginning: have a plan for the whole, or you'll have a hole in your plan. And in many ways, the Rugeley project was really about trying to identify a plan for the whole. Does it do full screen view?
It's going to be difficult to do that. It's because it's a PDF rather than
scroll down on the right.
Try that. Yeah, you just not. I can do your screen width. And then we'll just have to scroll it. I'll do it. If you shout, I'll scroll it.
So you'll scroll. If we scroll down slowly to the next one. So I'm guessing most people know where Rugeley is, but Mark asked me just to chuck it on a plan. I think what's quite interesting about Rugeley was that it's 8,000 population up until about the 1940s. And then that population really grew to 25,000 in quite a short space of time, and people will recognise the cooling towers and the chimney from its coal-fired power station, or Station A and Station B. And obviously people might recognise the Legal Colliery name. But actually, its connection with industry and energy generation goes back a lot longer back, the Chetwynds and the Paget family, right back in the 16th century. There's some really quite incredible innovations in there, including some of the first hydro generation. Politically, it's quite a complex area. The town falls into 2 district councils. It's within Staffordshire County. It's within the Stoke and Staffordshire LEP area. It's also the Greater Birmingham Solihull LEP area, and half of it sits within the West Midlands Combined Authority as a non-constituent. So there were lots of different things going on at the time. Having said that, I think this is kind of like a point of what I'm talking about. Is actually when you identify an objective that people can kind of all get behind, you can can approach it from a number of different angles simultaneously, which was really what we tried to do. So in 2017, which is when I sort of got involved, that power station was being closed down. Obviously, it's a coal-fired power station, had all sorts of issues with its ongoing operation. And the thinking at the time was just to close it down, and for an energy business was just to ship it out and forget about it. The truth of it was that there was much more that you can do, because you can start looking back into the heritage of a place and say, well, what does this represent? What does this stand for? What does this have to be? This doesn't have to be a story of declines, it can be a story of aspiration and hope. We can do something, we can work together to a different set of outcomes. And so we decided to keep hold of it, and if we scroll down to the next one, we started thinking, and bear in mind this was in 2017, we started thinking all the kind of outcomes we wanted to see around Rugeley. What happens when you close down a coal-fired power station and everything that goes with that, all the things that hadn't been dealt with when sort of the mines closed in the 80s were kind of still there in people's feelings and emotions and how they looked. And so we tried to come up with an idea that was how do you catalyse system change? So if I look at it commercially and economically, quite simply it was, well, if we're going to do an all-electric scheme, which in 2017 was what we committed to, that was there was no gas, this was about the transition from fossil fuels. So you can't close down a coal-fired power station and start pumping gas back into it. That didn't kind of seem to make a great deal of sense. Was what does that do to an energy system? And then we found out that all these different local authorities, all the different infrastructure companies, WPD, everyone had a different idea. The Stoke and Staffordshire had a local industrial strategy that had one use of the site. The two district councils had a different local plan. Western Power Distribution had a completely different, what they call the future energy scenario, and nobody can invest in its infrastructure. So bearing in mind as well that this was a time when new developments were being built, where they're putting district heating into housing developments, and homes were then being built with backup boilers. Now that was crazy. I saw that was crazy, and said, well, okay, let's look at the system as a whole and try and make the energy system as efficient as possible. So look at the entire system. And it got us to thinking, well, if we've introduced a constraint into the grid, and this is oversimplification, but this is kind of how my brain works. If you look at the grid as a whole, and we've taken a big generating asset out of it, and then we're building a whole load of new homes and businesses and schools and so on, then there's a bit of a mismatch. So we've got to turn what we're already using, we've got to reduce demand within the system as a whole. So simply put, if we retrofit the entire of Rugeley and reduce demand of energy within Rugeley, we don't then have to spend heaps loads of money putting in redundant infrastructure because we're using what we've got better. And that was the fundamental concept, because actually the power station guys, and the project was wrong, we called it zero carbon Rugeley, we shouldn't have done, because life is carbon based, and the entire pride and heritage of this place was built on its association with coal and carbon, and this, the efficiency with how the power station used to operate was fantastic. Everything was reused, everything was very much cherished. You thought, well, okay, how do you apply that into a new energy system that just simply isn't fossil fuel based in terms of its heating system? And then you start analysing it a bit more, and you suddenly realise, well, it also goes into road building and cars and trip generation. And why are we spending money building more roads to alleviate traffic, only to create capacity for more traffic? So we managed to introduce things into the planning discussions like, well, maybe we can find ways of investing in autonomous vehicles or demand response vehicles or other forms of transport. That means we don't have to build those roads. We solve the problem at root cause. So I've completely gone off track from the script. Down the next one. Sorry, please. Yes. So then at that time we bid for. Then while we're having that thinking about that energy system and reducing the cost of infrastructure reinforcement that we needed the development to take, so commercially I could reinvest in early infrastructure like restoring wetlands, which we managed to do with Staffordshire Wildlife Trust and other things, and bring forward that infrastructure, the infrastructure that people want early rather than the pipes in the ground. A funding application came for what's called Smart Local Energy Systems from Innovate UK. We put in a feasibility study, I wrote the bid, and we got rejected. It lost. And then it came to the next stage, and it got to a design stage, and I appointed somebody who came in, who wrote the bid, and they won. So the power of delegation. Now, the point about this slide was really to say that once we secured that funding under the Smart Local Energy System, it started taking on a completely different life to the power station development. And it became, well, okay, how do you decarbonise an entire town? That was the kind of level of ambition. Different components to that. So businesses, we've got an Amazon shed in Rugeley. You know, do you put solar on the Amazon shed? Can you then pipe that across into another area? There was an ideal standard. We had discussions about switching some of their fuel from gas to hydrogen, and again, some of that fatal heat from that industrial process, or that waste heat rather, from the industrial process, going into a small heat network for an existing residential community. Those sorts of ideas, where you start looking at the energy system as a whole. You know, how do you create hydrogen and use captive fleets for waste management, so they're moving trucks around powered by hydrogen, that's shifting energy from point A to point B. So all of those things were about how do you feed that into quite a complex model to see what the optimised balance of technologies might be, as well as what the skills requirements, what are the what do communities feel about this? What are the behaviours that need to shift? Are we explaining this in language that makes any sense? What are people's ideas that are actually telling us what the solutions that are going to work locally about that pavement over there that's the wrong route through the town or whatever it might be? So that kind of created lots of different work packages, lots of very complicated things. You know, Kiel, the work that they were doing up at the campus was just so visionary that we were so lucky in being able to create a relationship with Kiel to get them heavily involved. Working with Charlie and Shat, who spoke earlier about what are the actual realities of getting sort of willing to pay markets and getting retrofit moving at scale when you look at the sort of the impact on the system. If we can scroll down again, please. So it got quite complicated. These are the different areas that we looked at. Still quite a lot of work about policy. So really interesting to look at how planning policy, spatial planning policy, in terms of are you allowed, solar panels, or are you allowed air source heat pumps, to the whole, much more detailed elements of development control. How does that sit along transport policy? How does that sit alongside the rules? So take community energy. We wanted to create a community-owned solar farm that the residents within Rugeley would own a share in, would own a stake in, and that energy could then supply their homes. Policy doesn't make that very easy. It doesn't make it very easy to have a whole street regeneration. We had this thing up the flagpole. We had, the power station was acting as a symbol which enabled people to point at the same thing and go, you live in Rugeley, I haven't met you before, we care about the same thing, and that created quite a lot of local momentum, which actually policy started getting in the way of delivering. And that's, when I say policy, I'm not talking about necessarily just local policy, I'm talking about big system regulation stuff as well. And then all this is irrelevant if people don't use it. People don't use heat pumps in the way they're designed because they expect them to do a different thing, then it's going to fail. So, critically to this is this phrase, user-centric design, which is really one of those things that kind of just say, getting what is the best solution? What's the problem that people, what's the problem we're trying to solve? What's the best design way? The Apple iPhone is a great piece of user-centric design because it's easy to use and it's easier to make those things happen. So user-centric designs, how do we make it easy for people to make better choices within the context of an energy system? Next one, please. So what have we achieved? This is quite controversial because I don't think we've achieved nearly enough. I think there's a lot more to achieve. One of the points was this was a design program, and so it was genuinely never intended to create a legacy in its own right, but it was intended to provide an evidence base for other things to happen around it. And they may well still happen, and we'll touch on that in a minute. But what it did demonstrate is that this stuff works. So I probably can't see it, but it kind of talks there in terms of, this is in 2032, the cost savings, about £4 million per annum, with about 50 kilotons carbon reduction. This came out of the finding, the independent evaluation of the project just last week. So I'm probably not allowed to show it, but I can't paste it anyway. The other things that we did, we developed a tool for how you might optimise the location of EV charging points. It's no good putting an EV charging point when someone's not going to use it. It's got to be somewhere useful. We as the consortium, looked at different pathways towards retrofit, different market segments about the able to pay, the willing to pay markets. There's an investor panel that's been created of some of big money to see, well, how do you get access to some of the big money in a way that doesn't extract all the value out of the project before you can actually deliver the projects themselves. That's been a very important piece. We instigated what's called a local area energy plan. Again, that's going to be something we come back to as part of an evidence base. A local area energy plan maps out that maps across Stafford Borough, Lichfield and Cannock, the opportunity for bigger energy projects, similarly look at the energy system. And for me, this is about, again, that overlay between local development plans and local area energy plans, because energy people speak a completely different language to development people, yet we all need the same. You can't build new buildings and you can't retrofit existing buildings without understanding the grid and the network around you. We've delivered some energy improvement works, and we've supported some of the local groups and started delivering some training and developed a program, I think it was mentioned earlier, around community ambassadors. And then the next slide, I think I'm going to just squeeze through these actually. These are a little bit too much detail, I think, for 3 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon. So these were just a bit more the sort of findings on each of the work streams areas. And I think I've sort of summarised at the end, which is why I'm going to run through them. Some of this is a bit of a personal view because I'm now neither fish nor fowl in terms of I can't fully represent NG Rec Ones, I can't fully represent the project, but I'm going to. These are the things that I think I have got quite a lot of conviction about, and the previous slides were the justification, the evidence for that conviction. So fundamentally, it works. Looking at a system-wide basis within a place, this is what the place-based partnerships that Zoe referenced. It works. You reduce carbon, you reduce costs, things are more efficient. You're basically just using less stuff to do the same. I mean, it's being more efficient. There are lots of co-benefits. So whether it's air quality improvements, whether it's creation of jobs, when we look at this and we've got it's what you measure, isn't it? It's not just the carbon reductions, it's not just the cost savings, it's the impact on biodiversity, it's the impact on public health through more active transport. The whole thing works as a system, and those co-benefits don't tend to get monetised, so they tend to get lost a little bit. So I think there's a real importance to how we value the things that matter to us in our everyday lives. It's difficult. Every bugger's got a problem to throw at you. I think that's probably my biggest learning. There are things now, getting places SLES ready. What that means is that if you take up some of these technologies and the digital tools that we have now available to us for virtually nothing, whether it's the Raspberry Pi, little controllers and some domestic sensors, if you can start doing things that just get you in a position whereby you can become part of that greater network as data becomes more freely available, when it gets more transparent, when local grid operators start looking at something called active network management, where they start actually balancing things at a much more local level so you don't have those huge transmission losses. If you are positioned with some of that kit ready to go, then I think what we'll see is a massive uptick in how rapidly we can get energy efficiency, decarbonisation, reduce costs in our thinking. Investors are there. Cash is there, people are there, they're still going for the low-hanging fruit. Some of those rates that they're looking for are still a bit too high, but I kind of say the gravy train's over, the kind of paradigm that we have at the moment, and don't forget I'm one of those spiny capitalists, I suspect, that Charlie was talking about earlier. That world is over, I think, genuinely. I genuinely think that world is over, at least I hope it is. And I think there is a whole piece to play about long-term allocation of capital. So I talk about appropriate capital for appropriate projects. If you're looking for a quick fix, don't get into this stuff. If you've got long-term pension funds, for example, you've got the right discount rate, this stuff not only works, it sings. Households, individuals. Now, there's a real dilemma. It's not all about us, individuals, solving a problem and taking the pressure off government. I absolutely don't go with that. But what we can do has a massive, massive, massive impact. So our individual actions, of course, contribute to the wider system. So somebody talked about, why would I do it with a disruption? Well, I would do it because it helps my neighbour, and it helps my neighbour's neighbour, and it helps my... That's why I'm doing it. I'm not doing it just because my energy bill goes down and hopefully my property value goes up in the way that extensions used to get done because that will add value to my house or whatever. Because don't forget, if you don't retrofit your house, the value of your house will go down. So look at it as a defensive investment. But there's a moral imperative to do it as well. And I think people are beginning to make those value-based choices in terms of what they choose to buy, not just because of a monetary value. And I think consumer behaviour does adapt to that, and it is, and there are evidence in other sectors. Needs a really rounded approach on policy. It's no good fixing one bit of the system. The system's only as strong as its weakest link, and we have to fix all the bits. I think somebody talked about large corporates earlier, or large businesses. They might catalyse, but I think the grunt work, the real work, is going to be done by SMEs. We're going to need to invest back in trades. We're going to need to get all the trade, all of these things. That's what's going to drive impact, in my view. And it requires genuine partnerships. We delivered this in COVID. You know, we got together in the room far too late in the day. That lack of personal interaction, massive hole, massive hole. So next steps. I think somebody mentioned the Net Zero Living Staffordshire. So there's a consortium now which is actually about looking at the stakeholders, the governance, the policies, the alignment of plans across the county. Quite a few in the room are involved in that. We're looking to speak to everybody we can about what works, because this isn't about, again, this isn't going to be about local authorities or counties or government departments owning the solution. This is going to be about proper participation in what the solution is going to be, and proper participation in the design of those solutions. And there's all sorts of ongoing collaborations. Again, I'll probably just sort of stop there, but yeah, that was Zero Carbon Rugeley.
Chris, thank you very much for that. Because we're running so much behind time, what we're going to do is Alison is going to now take over from me, as you have for so much of this project, Alison, and we will now ask Paul Hopewell, and Charlie's still in the room, so you can now ask. I am doing it for you. You can now ask questions of any of the last three speakers, plus Paul and returning Charlie.
I've got to be out in 20 minutes.
And you've got to be out in 20 minutes. Well, keep your answers short then, Charlie.
If the previous panellists would like you to sit on the stage, we've only got seats for 4. So, and I don't want to risk anybody falling off, so this is why I have to stand.
Sure. I feel like an interloper if I get back on the stage.
I would have it. I hope you can hear me because I don't know where the mic has got to. Oh, it's good. Can you hear me anyway? Yeah. Okay, I will just carry on with that. We will have it for later. I would like very much to introduce Dr. Paul Hopewell, who is a local energy expert. He's done this something for us before. And so he has a pressing question and the issue that he would like to raise, and then he will stand here as part of the panel. But once that's done, it'll be up to you people to ask the questions. The panel, other than Paul, are not going to say anything else off their own bat. They're going to respond to your questions. Okay, off you go, Paul.
Okay, well, firstly, I feel a little bit like I'm fraudulently here in that I haven't done a presentation to deserve the place on the panel. So I ought to introduce myself a little bit and tell you why I'm here and what what purpose I've got. My name's Paul Hopewell, I'm an electrical engineer. I've been involved in energy for about 30 years. My early career was in research into small-scale generation for distribution systems. I wrote a thesis about how to connect large numbers of small generators, basically in a domestic situation. We envisaged at the time it was going to be gas-fired boilers with small generators in, like a mini CHP. We thought that solar panels would be exotic, but we included them, the principles are the same. Since then I've worked in generation, distribution, continued research. I've got a number of patents in tidal turbine power and wind power. Some of those are expired now, they're that old. So I am at heart an engineer. I look at things in a practical way, and you can think of me as a tame cynic. So I'm aware of a lot of the advances that have gone on in networks and automation. And 20 years ago, we, in the Institution of Electrical Engineers as it was then, it was that long ago, we coined the phrase the internet, the energy internet. So this was 10 years before smart grids really started to take off. The concepts were there. Moving load around in terms of time and generation. We've seen load shifting that was talked about by the lady from Kiel earlier on, by peak lopping, moving things around in time. Those concepts are well established, but very hard to do effectively. And so there's a couple of things that Alison mentioned that I wanted to raise. Basically, it's two words: storage and distribution. Those are fundamental restrictions which make the implementation of this a little bit more difficult than it ought to be. Storage, for example. Today when I looked at GridWatch, the figures were shown earlier on. I looked at GridWatch and wind was doing around about 1.5 gigawatts. Gas was doing about 20 gigawatts. Demand was 30 or so, 35 gigawatts. We've got 5 gigawatts of nuclear almost. It's reducing with time. We've got interconnectors and imports. So the wind is not reliable. No renewables are reliable. They are probabilistically reliable in that you can estimate that in a particular year you will get a certain amount of energy, but you can't guarantee when. Now, this winter there have been a number of challenging days for the grid where, like today, wind is very low and demand is high. And as we increase the quantities of renewables on the system, that means storage becomes ever more important. If we eliminate gas and other dispatchable generators completely, something has got to fill the gap. So if we do a little bit of a head exercise, I did some calculations to look at, if the wind is absent for 2 days, that 20 gigawatts is not available. How do we get over that sort of period? And taking some figures from a local proposal for a battery farm, it would take something like 20,000 of these 50 megawatt hour batteries to tide us through those 2 days. That's just, as an engineer, I look for solutions to problems, but I also look for problems with solutions. So I am very much a tame cynic, so that's a lot of storage to be had. There's also provisioning that is going to be difficult, and siting it. Not insurmountable, but difficult. The second problem is distribution. It's true that the grid concept is 100 years old, but the grid is the classic trigger's broom. Okay, we've had a grid for 100 years. It's not the same grid. It has advanced. It's had God knows how many new cables, new lines, new transformers. Some parts of it are extremely old. It's common to find 80-year-old transmission towers, 50-year-old cables, 60-year-old cables. The cable in your street may well be 80 years old. So much of that is true. But the means in which it is controlled and the energy converted, that has advanced enormously. So we've got capabilities that we didn't have 20, 30 years ago. Now, the grid can't really be done away with. The grid originally came along to help share reliability between regions. Each city would have its own collection of power stations, and because equipment breaks down, rather than every city having a spare generator, they said, okay, why don't we connect 2 cities or 2 towns, and rather than each having a spare generator, we'll have one between us. So that was an economical solution there. The need has evolved, so instead of sharing that reliability around, we can share energy, the resources around, the complementary generation around, and also storage. So grid still has a function, and the losses in it, well, they're still unavoidable due to physics. If you're moving power around between two places, you will inevitably get losses. Now, whether that is from a zero carbon source such as a large offshore wind farm or from any other source, you still get those losses. And you also get losses when you put energy into and out of batteries. So we may be substituting one form of losses for another one. So it's not automatically do away with grid and things get better, or everyone has batteries and things will work. It has to slide into a seamless transition between them. And the other side I've mentioned about distribution is there are limits in what can be distributed. For example, if you take an average house, it has something like an 80 amp fuse in series with the meter. So that limits you to about 18 kilowatts, which charges an enormous amount of energy. And a car charges, 7 kilowatts, a heat pump is 5, 8 kilowatts or so. So yes, you can then say there is the capacity there, but it doesn't stay that simple. If you've got one house there, the peak load of that house is whatever the peak load of that house is. Let's call it 10 kilowatts. Let's say it's a shower. If you have 10 houses, they aren't all going to take a shower at the same time. So you won't have 10 times 10 or 100 times 10. You won't have that. We have a concept called the after diversity maximum demand. It recognises that if I put my kettle on now and Alison puts her kettle on 5 minutes later, they don't overlap. The peak load is still one kettle. Now, when that's calculated on the sort of traditional housing, the after diversity maximum demand is about 1.8 kilowatts per house on a 100 house basis. When we add in electric charging and heat pumps, it goes from being 1.8 kilowatts to over 7 kilowatts. So that's more than tripled the amount of peak load that the network has to carry. And all the components of the network are sized according to the peak load. So if we've now suddenly increased the capacity, the required capacity, carrying capacity in the network, we will quickly get to the physical limits of what it can do. And for example, a standard large mains service cable running down the street may have a capacity of about 500 amps. That sounds like a lot. Now, that's in the old money, that's 160 houses. In the new world of fully electrified cars and heat pumps, that's 40 houses. So it can serve a quarter of the number of houses because we have substituted the fuel that they used to use from gas or oil has now been put in those wires. So the network has to evolve accordingly, and it is radical change that needs to happen. Now, so even when we have locally based systems and localized energy, we still have the need to move things around. If we are to share, let's say the classic situation I used to describe was, if we had tidal power around the country, we know we can predict exactly when and where it's going to be, and we can predict it years, decades in advance. But we do know that it moves around. So the high tide at Camaze Bay is not the same time as the high tide in Swansea Bay. So it moves around. And so you can imagine generation moving around the geography of the country. So you have to then make any rational use of that, you have to move this power around to meet where it's being used at the time. So we still have to have a grid. So that's my concept, context, and that's the point I wanted to make. And I'll give the microphone back to Alison.
Thanks very much to Paul for that, and that's a real eye-opener. Before we move on to questions, I would like, and I'm sure lots of you will have ideas, questions for Paul, but I would like to focus on Charlie Baker because he's about to leave us quite soon.
10 minutes.
So, yeah, okay, do 10 minutes to put your questions to Charlie first, and then we can be a bit more relaxed.
Just so I'm not cycling in the dark, just in case you're
Yeah, and that's a very good reason, I'll go with that. So questions, please, if you have questions for him. If you remember, Charlie was talking this morning about retrofit.
It's not a problem if you haven't, because then I can get off 10 minutes early.
Can I ask him a question?
You may, yes, of course.
Does retrofit add value to a house?
Yes. And it's a climbing value, so I don't need. Do I need the microphone? So 10 years ago, they were estimating the rise in value of a whole house retrofit at about 17,000, which is when I wanted to spend 40 was a problem. But recent research from RICS, Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, suggests that actually, as a result of the gas issue, that people are prepared to now recognise the cost of occupation of a property as a major value-making decision about whether they purchase it or not. And actually, if we could get to the point where cost of occupation of a property was the primary number, so your home's in Mac, if you got your local letting agent to say it costs this much to live in it, not just this much to rent it, that would make a lot of difference. So yes.
We actually had a RICS valuation of doing it without all the low energy, and then we had we refinanced and it increased in real terms by about £80,000.
You could send me that, could you? That's some primary evidence I would really like to have.
It was actually 100, but value's gone up a little bit.
I
so
understand.
I said about 80.
Charlie@red.coop, please. I mean, really, honestly, because the problem is there's so much hearsay about what the valuation is and whether it's worth doing, that's a beautiful nugget of research.
And 4 years ago, the valuers refused to accept it. So I'm hoping this valuation wasn't done more than 4 years ago, because that would just make it
last year.
Excellent, fantastic.
Yeah, no, every year.
I can tell you a story. An ex-colleague of mine was an architect for Newark and Sherwood Council, David Pickles. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's the fuel poverty expert. And he would design houses and spend any extra cash, not on fancy kitchen, but insulation, but he didn't really tell anybody about it because he didn't think it would be very popular with the councillors, etc. And after a few years, they began to realise that people were asking to live in these houses because the energy costs were so much lower than anywhere else.
And the bit we're also forgetting is the health issue.
Well, yeah. And from that, then they set up one of the first EU energy agencies in the country and rolled out that work. So there is that anecdotal, just from local knowledge. Yeah.
So I've got another question, not for you, not for Charlie, but you mentioned policy. Gillian, you didn't, but you work in the council, so I'm just wondering.
I did mention a bit.
Not as much, but not the challenges that you were mentioning on a bigger level. Is that so? Are you having discussions with your colleagues in planning and on discussions on national level in order to facilitate some of these changes that need to happen, both at the local and the national level?
Yeah, well, I go. So, yeah, we're very much, determined by national. However, we are, Staffordshire Moorlands, developing, I'm going to get the term wrong, so I'm not a planning expert, the guidance. Mark will know.
SPD?
Guidance, but not, that it's
supplementary
planning
planning.
Guidance, yes, that's it, thank you. That it looks at the whole of the climate change piece, so adaptation as well as the energy, so that should leverage that.
Your SPD also ought to define permitted development in terms of EWI as well, because at the moment it's not very clear. You have got permitted development if you match the materials, but if anyone's ever tried stick-on bricks and whether they work or not, I would touch them with the barge pole, which means you technically don't have PD, but you could put that into your SPG.
Okay, I'll believe you.
Please.
Planning, but yes, okay.
I think there's a lot that SPDs, SPGs can do. I completely agree with that. A few years ago, Client Earth took a lot of local authorities to court for their local plans not meeting the obligations of the Climate Act. The fact is we've got the powers. Policies can be created, they simply aren't.
But this was a detail as well, though, that if somebody wants EWI on their house, do they need planning or not?
No, massively important.
Because that's easy now.
But when you look at a large project, the energy input as a statutory consultee, it doesn't exist in the way that there might be a local flood authority. So you can't build those houses in floodplain, or you've got to put sustainable urban drainage in. Energy doesn't come into it. There is an evidence base to require new development. So Section 106 payments could be hypothecated towards retrofit funds. They could be doing all sorts of things. That framework doesn't exist. nothing stops it from existing, and the answers are kind of there. So there are examples. Exeter's got quite a good case study. Newcastle under Lyme, they're going through a local development plan. All this stuff is about an evidence base to influence the planning policy, where the tools can exist now, but simply aren't being implemented. Sorry, that's a bit of a rant, but...
Any more from me, because I'm going to get on the road if not. Any more? Right, well, this has been brilliant, and I'm really hoping I can help you get something together in the future.
Thank you, Charlie. Have a good ride back. Okay, do we have any other questions for any of the panelists? And Paul, would you like to keep, Charlie's been keeping that seat warm for you?
It is actually warmer up here.
Yes,
He rises me not paying attention this morning.
I think Vincent's question.
It's really a related question and point to do with planning, and it's why is it that we still see so much new build and executive houses and ordinary small houses that the developers just don't put in any provision for combating climate change? And I mean, an example I can give recently is a whole estate in which you see big houses, expensive houses. I have no idea what the quality of insulation is. There isn't a solar panel inside. They all have gas boilers.
Yeah.
They all have
Yeah.
small-sized radiators. They are going to be a major retrofit problem.
Yeah.
And yet, the developers have no constraints put on them. Planning authorities could do it, could they not?
I would say yes, but I'm not a planning person, but because, yeah, I agree, and there's some willingness I've heard as well with the net zero ready. You know, what does that mean? But I mean, I'm a reformed energy manager from large universities. I used to battle as if we don't put it in now, we're going to have to do it in 10, 20, whatever years. So I agree. But if you can help me get it there, I'm very much on your side with that. I'm very much on your side.
I think, again, Nick said it earlier about we don't have to build to the regulatory minimum. And he talked about you can choose to go. But the building regs and the planning system is a regulatory minimum. It's a compliance-based system. There is nothing incentivising. So I'm a developer. Nothing incentivises me to go beyond the minimum. Now, we chose to for various reasons. The private rent institutional investment looks at operating costs and running costs as one of its metrics. But there are some very worrying things that I hear on the grapevine. Big developments, if they've already started with gas infrastructure, might get an exemption to carry on putting gas boilers in. You know, it is simply not good enough to have a policy framework that is incoherent and then isn't robustly enforced. Because the market will do what the market does, and I'm not, it's part of the world in which we live.
Yeah. And also the developers have a get-out clause, is that they can put a financial case forward for not doing certain things, because they say it doesn't make their...
It's a very thin one.
I know, but
I mean, the marginal cost is small.
Yeah,
Some developers are doing very well, though. Some developers are getting ahead of the game because they recognise that this is this critical stuff. But the system is weighted in the favour of the really large ones who not all of them are progressive, because, and frankly, they don't all have in the same ways that a lot of people criticise local authorities for not having all the skills and the capacity. Lots of the developers don't. They've got skills trained based on 10, 20 years ago. There's no incentive for them to move forward.
I think there is also an element of cost as well. Obviously, there is always the temptation to go with the most cost-effective solution, and there is local authorities are often looking at that as well, trying to actually looking at a good quality take-up sounded kind of requirements, but also there is that sort of cost associated that it's got quite large weight on the decision. So I think it's a combination, obviously, of having that sort of better regulated and enforced, but at the same time to get that support to kind of pay off the difference of that additional cost as well is something that we try to see whether there is an opportunity to kind of cover that difference. And some of the grant schemes, like the public sector decarbonization scheme I mentioned earlier, is often in targeting that sort of technologies that cost a little bit more, but obviously on the long term they will provide that return and benefits for the environment as well. And then we just with the grant covering the difference in terms of the cost to replace a like for like with a more energy efficient one. So in terms of new houses, it potentially should be the same until actually the market level up, and then is kind of a standard practice.
I mean, in an ideal world, all boroughs, districts, all planning authorities would all jump at the same time. Because I think there's a fear that if Staffordshire Moorlands jumps for that first, then the developers will go, I'm going to go over there because I'll make more money. And so there's a sort of political fear, and there's obviously targets to build houses. So I think there's almost a, well, I'll go if you go. And if we all jumped at the same time, it would be, this this utopian.
The future home standard is filling some of those gaps.
It will do,
hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully, yeah. Touch wood. Yeah, it should. But then we had, we had that. Yeah, we had that, 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And we've gone backwards so far.
Supply chains were gearing up, so the degradation of the supply chain in the last 10 years has been traumatic, really. I mean, it's been very, very bad. Had we maintained Copa sustainable homes, the supply chain, the house builders were getting there. I think there would have been a lot further forward.
Yeah.
I think your point though was that it's kind of criminal that we're building houses now that will need to be retrofitted in the next 10 years.
Yeah.
That makes no sense.
No.
Any other comments before the next question? Any other questions? Any other questions?
Oh, you said that twice.
Well, I said it twice because the second time was with this.
Alison?
Yes?
Yeah, it's not a question, it's just that I was just going to let you know MCA are considering a climate round table after the elections. We've heard from councillors at Staffordshire Moorlands that they would like to do things but they don't have the powers. And what we're looking to do is get our MPs around the table as well and let our councillors and officers speak to the MPs to say what powers they do need. So there'll be a new balance, fair to say, after May. I don't know what it'll look like. But there'll be an opportunity there. And we'd like experts who would like to be part of that panel to maybe come forward and volunteer to help us if you'd like to be part of that panel. And we'll see if it works. It's just an idea. We might be just pie in the sky, but at least we'll try. It's a shame there's no councillors here today, this afternoon, because the afternoon was really the section for them to take notice, but there's none here.
There is. Sue's on planning as well.
I'm seeing a few people who might be councillors after May. But yeah, so that's MCA's ambition really. So if you'd like to be part of that, please let us know. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions?
Can I just go back to Paul's point about essentially capacity in the grid? Maybe not capacity, but is it really a local issue, or is it a grid-wide issue? By local, is it the wires running effectively from the substations to the houses?
It is a universal issue. Every component has a capacity to carry stuff, and it was designed and installed with that in mind. So as the role changes, then maybe some equipment is no longer adequately rated, and that is going to be exacerbated with the transport switch. For every 10,000 or so miles driven in an electric car, that's equivalent to adding in another domestic consumption per year, equivalent to 10,000 miles is one household electricity bill for a year. So for every 10,000 that we put on, we get 10,000 new houses equivalent of. This is at the backdrop, this is the cost of electrification. So we will be needing to put more energy into the system and move it around more.
If I can ask Paul a follow-up question from that, because this is where I got quite interested in where hydrogen might have applications mainly around freight and transport. Because if you think about it, creation of hydrogen, movement of hydrogen is another way of moving energy from one place to another place. It just doesn't go under the ground in a pipe. And so if you get to mass hydrogen transportation for large freight vehicles, that displaces pressure that could otherwise go on the grid if people are looking at electrification of...
Absolutely. There's been a number of concepts investigated over the years of co-locating hydrogen production with an energy node. Now, it obviously makes no sense to produce the hydrogen in the middle of the North Sea, but where the power lands anywhere in that sort of vicinity would be, I think there's active projects on the northeast, on Teesside, of looking at creating hydrogen from those sources. Now, I like the thought of moving the hydrogen around by road. It's like closed sections of pipe being transported, isn't it, rather than burying the pipes underground. But it's an energy vector. But again, the conversion between electricity and hydrogen and back into motion, heat, computation, whatever, is not lossless. So for each time we add in an energy transition, energy translation from one form to another, then we introduce extra losses, and it all ends up as heat.
And that heat has to go somewhere.
Who comes in here?
I'm mindful of the time. It's about 5 minutes to 4 and we have to finish at 4. So I think now is probably the time to wrap it up. Thanks very, very much indeed to the panel. Can we give them a round of applause?